Though, so for me, even though I may not be able to start from the physical, with some sort of muscle issue, I could definitely work with frustration. Therapists should be able to work from the emotional aspect of things, the emotional domain, and then work from there. So if someone were to say, and actually Mark kind of said something like this, but if someone were to say, I feel lethargy, so I feel no energy in my body. And so to me, that's more of a physical, like I have no energy, I have no physical drive in my body, but there could be an emotional component as well. So the person might say, I feel lethargy, no energy in my body, but there's no emotional component to it. But at the same time, I feel worthless and hedonic, so the inability to feel pleasure. So the person, let me start this over. This person might say, I feel lethargy, no energy in my body, but there is no emotional component. But at the same time, I feel worthless and I don't experience pleasure because about having no motivation and being lethargic. So they might say that I feel no motivation and lethargic, and I feel worthless and I don't feel pleasure about having no motivation and being lethargic. But for me, as the way I work as a therapist, is, well, what came first? And I often spend a pretty good amount of time, it's definitely my initial assessment, or when like panic attacks come up, or relapses and whatever. Like I want to spend time doing a chain analysis of, okay, what happened first, and then what happened before that, and as best you can remember, so we can get a clearer picture of what's going on in that moment. So if someone says I have no lethargy, or I'm sorry, if I have no energy, and I also feel worthless, and they're attributing the worthlessness to feeling lethargy, that could be true, sure. But I could also see someone who feels worthless feeling lethargy at the same time, and they probably stem from a defensive state that's more of a shutdown. So the point here is that I think it's easy for us to attribute this came first and then that, but we may not know. Like, even though we know ourselves best, we're not exactly objective. When it comes down to it, we might not be, and probably are not, all that objective about our own experiences and what we're going through and whatnot. A lot of times in therapy, someone will say, I think this way, therefore I feel that way. And we know from story follow state concept of polyvagal theory that it's probably, these things can feed into each other, but there's a defensive state, or there's a polyvagal state that is influencing the cognitions. So I think it's more accurate to say that there's some sort of defensive state that is affecting the thoughts in our brain. And the thoughts in our brain can influence our emotions as well, or our state as well. But it's not like people are able typically to say, my thoughts are really being flavored by the emotion I'm going through, which is being flavored by the polyvagal state that I'm in, and my stuck or my incomplete impulses and the sensations I'm living with. Like, usually we're not able to parse things out like that. And so saying this thing comes first and then I'm doing this might not be accurate. It could be. So for me, it's like, what came first? And that's where I like to do a chain analysis to see kind of how things flow. It brings me a lot of information as a therapist. Now, on top of this, Mark mentioned frustration. That is an emotion. Frustration is an emotion, and I think it's a direct experience, or emotional experience of a defensive state. So for me, frustration, when I feel frustrated and when I notice it with other people, is that there's some flight-fight energy. There's energy to do something. We have mobility in our system, so that mobility is being directed toward a task, and maybe that's finishing a level in a video game. Maybe that's completing something at work. Maybe it's trying to communicate. It could be all kinds of stuff. So we have mobility in our system, and we're directing it to something. But then we're stopped from completing the goal, or we cannot complete the goal. So something is stopping us, or we simply are not able to complete the goal for some reason. So that's frustrations. When you're mobile and you're ready to do something, you're trying to do something, you've put in a plan maybe, but then you're stopped, or you can't do it for some reason. And then you get frustrated because you can't meet the goal. You can't use your mobility toward that goal. So I would just say, be careful when attributing thoughts and emotions. I particularly pay attention to the sequences of the SSIEC domains. This is something you may have heard me talk about before. But I like to look at what's the sequence of events, what's actually happening when I'm going through something or when my client is going through something. What is happening now, what came before and what came before that. I think it's extremely important. And actually right now I'm feeling some frustration because I am mobile and I am wanting to record this in silence. And I was trying to sneak in some time, but now there is commotion. There's noise across the street, people blowing leaves around and whatnot. So I'm going to ignore that for now. And hopefully it's not too much when I'm in editing. I'm going to continue to use my mobilization energy to complete this task of recording this episode, which I really want you to hear. Back to my point, be careful when you're attributing thoughts and emotions. I like to pay attention to the sequences of events. If you struggle with that, I have a free download. It's called SSIEC. It's State, Sensation, Impulse, Emotion, Cognition. And that's at justinlmft.com/SSIEC, justinlmft.com/SSIEC. A lot of letters, I know. I'll put a link in the description as well. But basically, if you struggle with parsing out, well, what's a sensation, what's an emotion, what's a cognition, what's an emotion, because these things, what's an impulse, all those. If you have difficulty identifying those, this is a sheet that kind of like lays out, here's different words for these different categories of your experiences. And so you can start to look at that and build language for what you're going through. And that might help you to differentiate, these different pieces of your moment-to-moment experience. And also one more request, actually, do me a quick favor if you can and hit the subscribe button or tap it or click it. You can do it whatever way you want. Following is make sure it ensures that you get the next episode that comes out, or subscribing, but it also tells whatever platform you're on that this is important and that somebody else should listen to it. So do me a favor, that'd be much appreciated if you could subscribe or follow to this. This and other content I create is not therapy, not intended to be therapy or be a replacement for therapy. Nothing in this creates or indicates a therapeutic relationship. Please consult with your therapist or seek for one in your area if you are experiencing mental health symptoms. Nothing should be understood to be specific life advice. It is for educational and entertainment purposes only.